we're watching a heck of a lot more than just who the bench boss is going to be. We've had plenty of conversations about Mark Scheifele's future. Blake Wheeler's name is now in the mix amongst the trade boards. And now we get reports on Pierre-Luc Dubois. I mean, it's more like who's not in the trade talks right now than who is for the Winnipeg Jets. But what did you make of the reports out of RDS that it's the New York Rangers, a very familiar trading partner with the Winnipeg Jets, albeit with the new general manager, although the one that pulled the trigger on the Andrew Kopp deal, that they have serious interest in Pierre-Luc Dubois. Have you thought at all about that? And if the Jets were to trade Pierre-Luc Dubois at this point before next season with 2 years left of team control, how significant a return does that bring back? And have you thought at all about looking at the Rangers roster as to what package could make Kevin Cheveldayoff say, yes, that's the right thing for the Winnipeg Jets to do?
Yeah, I think that based on where, I would think that the New York Rangers are in terms of they're looking at their success as an opportunity to really double down over these next few years. Obviously, they have an elite goaltender. They have a lot of nice pieces. And if they're able to add a center like Pierre-Luc Dubois, it sort of brings them, it legitimizes them. They might not need Shesterkin to have one of the best seasons ever to have the success that they just had. And I think that would be one of those smart and aggressive moves from a team like that if they were able to pull it off. Certainly, we have some Jets Rangers history as well. Kopp, Trouba, etc. So Kevin Hayes before that. I haven't done the deep dive on the Rangers roster in an attempt to figure out what specifically Winnipeg could pull back. I think that the ideal Pierre-Luc Dubois trade, and I agree with you that if you trade him now, you get more for him than if you trade him next season. If you're going to maximize the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade return, you either do it while you have 2 years of team control, or you wait till next season and allow the club involved to negotiate a deal in advance so that they can immediately extend Pierre-Luc Dubois, and then they'll give you the value in exchange for what an extended Pierre-Luc Dubois would be worth, because you're not getting as much for him with 1 year left on his deal as you would in either scenario. So here's what I think, Huss. I think as much as there's some pressure and seems some serious, significant interest, including from the Rangers on Dubois, and that might lead to a trade if the package is good enough, I still think that Winnipeg has shown to itself to be a patient organization, and they might rather return Dubois. He's able to contribute quite a lot to the team, as we've seen this last year, while still perhaps being interested in testing free agency in the future. I'm not sure that now is exactly the time, but if the insiders say it's going to happen, I have no reason to doubt that necessarily. I think the biggest thing is to get back somebody who can step into a Dubois-like role. Maybe not they just had the season that Dubois had, but a second-line center in waiting, a top four defenseman who you could reasonably project onto that first pairing in due time, and then a package of futures, whether that's a first-round pick and a meaningful prospect or what have you, depending on how many years of Pierre-Luc Dubois that team gets back.
Yeah, Philip Cheadle is a guy that we've heard quite about. He didn't have a great regular season numbers wise, but certainly had sort of a breakout playoffs. We'll get to that. By the way, great crew in here today, folks. If you haven't already, for those of you who are on YouTube that have hit the red subscribe button, make sure you do that. We're here every day, 1 p.m. Central, Monday to Friday, talking with great folks like Chris and Murat. So make sure you do and join us. And turn your notifications on as well, because if something happens during the weekend, we will jump on at some point with the latest news on a Jets coaching hire. If it happens, you'll hear about it here at Winnipeg Sports Talk. So subscribe, turn your notifications on, and make yourself a regular here with the gang in the WST chat. Just looking at the Rangers, I mean, I would think, and certainly, when you're trading a player like Pierre-Luc Dubois at his age, Murat, there is risk involved because you're probably getting back a number of pieces. And I would imagine the focus would be on younger pieces. Philip Cheadle is the one guy we've talked about. Braden Schneider on the blue line is another player that I think would be attractive. What about their early picks? I mean, they had some great fortune in the draft. Capo Caco, number 2 after Jack Hughes, and number 1 overall, Alexis Lafreniere, who so far through their NHL careers have been somewhat pedestrian. Any thoughts on those players and their potential going forward as to, maybe being part of a deal?
I mean, I would think that, oh goodness. So following through the Patrick Laine becomes Pierre-Luc Dubois way of thinking, if there is someone who was highly touted, who does have the pedigree, but who for whatever reason hasn't stepped forward and has already delivered results for that draft slot in the market that they're in, I mean, that's kind of an ideal trade type if you're the Winnipeg Jets, presuming you believe that Lafreniere or whomever is going to step into themselves and become the player that you hope for. And that's an amount of homework that I haven't done in terms of Lafreniere's year, Capo Caco's last couple of years in New York. I do think that there's some reason to think of that as ideal. If you're New York, you probably want and hope like heck to hold on to those players. Just given the fact that one of them could go off, this is not the same thing because Nathan MacKinnon was on another level already and always. But the year that he went off, I think this is 2016 or 2017. This is a few years ago already. Don't quote me on the number, but this is a few years ago. He started off with one of the coldest Octobers, that I can remember a number one overall pick with that level of stature having before he exploded. And I think that there's reasons to be patient with these guys. Always, for every Nail Yakupov that doesn't become that guy, I think there's a lot of people who do reach their potential in due time. But New York has those guys. They have who's the defenseman that you mentioned, the young defenseman just a second ago?
Braden Schneider. He played 20 games 100%. In the playoffs. I mean, a guy with the Western Hockey League background. I mean, a number of things that would be possible. And hey, he's 20 years old. And I think if you're trading a guy like Pierre-Luc Dubois, you're wanting some guys that are a little earlier on to give the team more team control and more time to turn them into NHL stars that can help you get to where you want to go.
Yeah, and you know what? Braden Schneider, come to think of it, is a player I've done some homework on, and I think Winnipeg would be really interested in a player specifically like him. I think New York would be a little bit hesitant to part with him, but Schneider is, I think, the type of, you could imagine this guy being on the top pair or at least a very good top four defenseman in the same way that you'd ideally want a future, a center who could be a very good second line center, or maybe if everything broke right, even play first line center for you. That's the hope if you're trading for a package of futures for Dubois.